Well, hello and welcome everyone to our virtual session on expansion opportunities within the South Carolina automotive industry. My name is Christina Stauf and I'll be moderating this panel today on behalf of the South Carolina Department of Commerce Europe office. Our managing director, Vanessa Gerschel, is just got out of back surgery and is still recovering, so she will unfortunately not be able to join us today, but she sends her regards. And it is truly great to see so many of you here connected with us, and thank you very much for showing interest in growing your business in the United States and for showing interest in the state of South Carolina. We know that the current times are challenging for international trade in general, and also that the automotive industry is undergoing fundamental changes right now. So we are even more happy to see you here to talk about opportunities. Looking at our content for today, we have put together a comprehensive program for you for the next 1.5 hours that covers a variety of topics from a general automotive industry overview and outlook for South Carolina. We're going to look into a regional automotive cluster. We'll talk about trade issues, and we'll finally get some hands-on information on how to start your own manufacturing facility in South Carolina. So we hope that by the end of this webinar today, you will have a good overview about our state and how important the automotive industry is. We hope that you will see what opportunities our state offers and also know about what resources are available to support you in your individual endeavors. And of course, we hope that you are interested in learning more and we can have a more in-depth conversation after our webinar. Just a few housekeeping notes at the beginning. You will all be able to send us questions anytime during the webinar using the question box in the control panel. We will collect them and we will answer them at the end of the 4 sessions that we have prepared for you. There might be some questions that we're not able to answer within the time frame we have today, and we will follow up with you individually on this if we cannot cover them. And the same applies to the questions you already handed in advance. We will send you a follow-up email to this webinar, and we'll give you the opportunity to have one-on-one meetings with anyone from the panel today, if that's of interest for you. You can just reply to our email and we will schedule this individually for you. I don't want to jump ahead of any of the great speakers we have today, but at the beginning, I just want to point out that the automotive industry is an integral part of our state's economy. It employs more than 72,000 people in South Carolina, and that is a big number for us, considering that South Carolina in US terms is a relatively small state with 5 million inhabitants. And also South Carolina is leading the nation in workforce employed by international companies. That's what we are very proud of, and that we from the Department of Commerce and everyone who's on this call today is working on hand in hand every day. We also call ourselves Team South Carolina, which I think is a great expression to describe how we operate. As a result of this teamwork, Team South Carolina has helped more than 1,200 foreign-owned operations with accessing the US market by locating in South Carolina. And that is not just due to the charming weather and the southern hospitality, but mainly based on how we support our businesses. What is important for you to know is that the South Carolina has experience in accommodating international companies of all sizes and different nations, and it's our goal to support you so you are successful in the long term. The South Carolina Europe office that I am representing is located in Munich, Germany. And with our team, we usually, in normal times, travel together with our partners across the European continent and consult companies like yours on your US market expansion. So we can provide you with complementary information on industry statistics, workforce programs, labor availability, available sites and offices, cost of doing business, incentives, and so on. And very importantly for us too, it doesn't really matter at what stage you are right now, whether you just started thinking about entering the US market, whether you already have sales in the US, or whether you're ready to invest in your own operation. We are here to serve as a resource for you to help you figure out the right strategy for the market. And although we unfortunately are not able to meet in person at this time, we are still offering the same support and will help you with any information available. So now we would like to know a little bit more about the audience. You should see a poll popping up shortly. And we would like to know from you if you've already been in South Carolina before. And just take the time and we'll come back to that later. So without further ado, let me just start with our first topic that we have on the program, overview and outlook of the South Carolina automotive industry, and head over to Amy Tinsley. Amy is the Executive Director of the South Carolina Automotive Council. And in this role, she connects the automotive industry in our state and facilitates dialogue on industry relevant and current topics like trade policy, supply chains, workforce, and economic development. And by this, she's fundamental in helping the industry grow. So Amy, we are very glad to have you here with us today, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Christina, so much. I appreciate being part of today's webinar, and thank you all for joining us and taking the time to be here today. And can I get the next slide, please, Christina? We have 5 main focus areas that the South Carolina Automotive Council focuses on. We are part of a larger trade alliance, the South Carolina Manufacturers Alliance, which is a private organization, privately funded, organization that works to advance manufacturing in our state. And our Automotive Council works with our automotive members and the automotive community in general in South Carolina. We focus on legislative and regulatory advocacy, so lobbying at the state level, our state legislature, our state government and agencies to make sure that South Carolina is a great place for manufacturers to do business, and that we have a great policy and business climate for manufacturers to do business and for business in general. We focus on industry engagement and events, bringing members of the automotive ecosystem together, from the OEMs to the tier 1 and 2 suppliers to small to medium businesses and service providers, academia, economic development professionals, government professionals, and we bring all those folks together to talk about the latest in automotive, not just in South Carolina, but nationally and globally. We also focus on workforce and economic development, so opportunities like this one, opportunities like our South Carolina Automotive Summit, which I will speak a little more about later, and other one-off meetings and events to just bring people together to form connections. In addition, we focus on supply chain. We're always looking to build a more robust supply chain for our automotive manufacturers in South Carolina. We focus on B2B matchmaking, helping connect smaller companies with our larger companies, looking for gaps in our supply chain and areas we can always be working to improve and bring additional suppliers to our state. We also focus on innovation, working to spotlight the innovation that's happening within our industry, driving innovation within our existing industry through partners like the South Carolina Fraunhofer Alliance, the South Carolina Research Authority, our wonderful schools and academic institutions in South Carolina, and many other programs that help to drive innovation in our automotive industry. Next slide, please. So you may be wondering, where exactly is South Carolina? So in the United States, we are on the East Coast. We're that beautiful state that looks like a piece of pizza or a piece of pie. And as Christina mentioned, we're in a beautiful part of the world. We have a wonderful climate, wonderful people, and I think most importantly, wonderful food. So if you haven't been here, we would love for you to come and visit us. things are a little bit different and we've kind of gotten past COVID. But most importantly, South Carolina has great access to other Southeastern and U.S. markets. John will talk a little more about that later, our geographic proximity to other OEMs. And we also are home to a wonderful port that I'll tell you a little more about later, obviously being a state bordering the Atlantic Ocean. Next slide, please. As you can see, we're the second fastest growing state in the eastern U.S. South Carolina has experienced tremendous population growth, and with that has come industry growth, and we're just very excited about all that's going on in our state and the momentum that we have going forward in a lot of different areas, including manufacturing. Next slide, please. To be such a small state, South Carolina has a really robust infrastructure system. We're a 2-day drive from over 200 million Americans, which is roughly 2/3 of the U.S. population. That includes the major East Coast markets, as well as Detroit, Chicago, and Dallas. We have 5 major interstate systems that cross the state, 4 primary airports, and an extensive rail system, which you can see represented on this map. In addition, you're within an hour's drive to the north of Charlotte Douglas International Airport, and to the south, the Atlanta International Airport. So really any type of infrastructure to meet the needs of a manufacturer we have here. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we're very, very proud of our port system. Currently, our port in Charleston is on track to be the deepest harbor on the East Coast. That project is on schedule and will be a 54-foot depth. Just a few weeks ago, the port celebrated the arrival of the biggest container ship ever to call on the U.S. East Coast, which was a ship that could carry over 15,000 cargo units, so very impressive. In addition, we have 2 inland ports, both in Greer and in Dillon. And our port is also adding a new terminal that will be completed in March of 2021, and that will be the United States' first container terminal to open since 2009. So obviously a lot of exciting things happening at our port, a lot of momentum and a lot of investment in South Carolina's infrastructure to make sure that we are able to support the needs of our growing industries, particularly automotive. As you'll see in a minute, there's a tremendous amount of tires and completed passenger vehicles that pass through our port, and we're very proud of that. Next slide, please. As you can see, this is just a snapshot of some of our many global automotive brands. This in no way includes everyone, but of course, we're very proud to be home to BMW, Volvo, and Mercedes-Benz vans, a number of global tire manufacturers, Michelin, GT, Bridgestone, Continental, a number of Tier 1 suppliers that you see listed here. The list goes on, and the list continues to grow. Next slide, please. South Carolina, as Christina mentioned, is home to a number of foreign firms, as you can see represented on this map. This is not just automotive, this is a total foreign direct investment, but clearly a great home to so many companies from around the world. And South Carolina is a top destination for foreign investment. We rank #1 nationwide in attracting jobs through foreign investment, according to IBM study, and we consistently rank really high in that report. We also rank #2 in the U.S. and the highest concentration of foreign direct investment job. Our share is 8.3%, so close to 10% of our employment, and nationally that average is around 5.8%. So clearly South Carolina is a great place to do business for foreign companies, and we continue to add to that roster. Next slide, please. As you saw on the previous slide, we have a number of OEMs, and I really just wanted to show you this slide to illustrate that while we have a great cluster in the upstate, which John will speak more about, we have a number of firms through the middle of our state, and then in the low country area of our state near Charleston and the coast. So our automotive presence is really strong across the state, and South Carolina has 46 counties, smaller subunits of government around the state, and we have automotive companies in I believe it's 42 of those 46 counties, but very close to almost all of the counties have automotive manufacturing or automotive companies in those counties, which we're very proud of. So truly a statewide presence. Next slide, please. As you can see, top industry sectors in South Carolina, automotive components is obviously very high on that list. These are FDI companies, and you can see that majority-owned foreign affiliated companies employ more than 145,000 South Carolinians. So a tremendous number and one we're really proud of, and automotive is a very, very big part of that number. Next slide, please. As Christina mentioned, South Carolina is #1 in the export sales of both tires and completed passenger vehicles. So for this past year, we had $10.3 billion in completed passenger vehicle export sales. That's about 18% of the entire U.S. market. With tires, that number was $1.75 billion, and an even larger share of the U.S. market at around 35%. From 2011 to 2019, we've added over 22,000 jobs in the automotive industry, which was $8.9 billion of capital investment attached to those same announcements, and a $27 billion annual economic impact, and that number is growing. So we continue to see a huge impact on our state's economy, and automotive is really one of the foundations of our manufacturing economy in South Carolina. Next slide, please. With some of our companies that are here, we've had some major milestones in the past few years. In March of last year, Volvo Cars began exporting their S60s. They also have plans to make the XC90 here in South Carolina in the coming years. In October of last year, BMW celebrated 25 years of production in South Carolina, and in that time, they built almost 5 million vehicles. They have more than 11,000 employees and have invested almost $11 billion. So obviously a huge part of our automotive success is BMW and their supplier network, and we're happy to have Volvo as part of that family now, as well as Mercedes-Benz Vans. Mercedes-Benz Vans continues to grow. They officially opened a new training space in Somerville last year, and they are a major supplier to Amazon. So Mercedes-Benz Sprinter vans, I see them frequently in my driveway, delivering Amazon packages to me on a very frequent basis. And so that's a great partnership that they have with Amazon, and we certainly expect to see continued growth given Amazon's growth. So a lot of exciting things happening in the automotive community in South Carolina, particularly with our OEMs, which then drives further growth for their suppliers and service providers. Next slide, please. I know COVID-19 is top of mind for all of us. Seems that we just hear about it constantly. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about COVID-19's impact in South Carolina and beyond, and the recovery. So a unique thing about the state of South Carolina is in South Carolina, manufacturing was always considered an essential business. So there was never any mandated governmental closure for manufacturing and facilities in South Carolina. Some facilities did close, primarily due to supply and demand issues, and they are up and running again. But in terms of a government mandated shutdown of manufacturers, we never had that in South Carolina. In addition, due to our coastal location, our state has a great deal of experience with emergency planning and response, and that was a definite advantage working through the early weeks of the pandemic and rolling out the state's response and emergency management structure. At this time, we continue to see positive momentum in our automotive sector with everyone, getting back to work, demand coming back. So we're very proud that recovery is really being enhanced by the automotive sector. Overall, the U.S. market was obviously impacted in many different ways depending on your location. Many states did have mandated governmental closures of businesses that included manufacturing facilities. So this in turn created supply chain issues that rippled through the automotive sector. And in many cases, while our South Carolina companies were allowed to operate, they were unable to get certain components. So the different handling of COVID-19 and business closures in other states did create problems for South Carolina, but also spotlighted the fact that South Carolina was open for business and our manufacturers were able to do business during that time. In terms of just some general US and North America automotive numbers, most markets in the Americas right now are doing better than expected, although certainly lower volumes than 2019. It's also interesting some of the changes that COVID-19 has caused in our automotive sector. It has created what some have described as an unequal market with more expensive vehicles faring better than more affordable or cheaper vehicles, and also a huge demand for pickup trucks and large trucks that has outpaced demand in recent years has taken place during the past few months. Also, the most recent September numbers show that the U.S. demand for light vehicles continues to kind of surge forward since the sudden drop that began in March. That really bottomed out in April, and at that point, at the bottoming out in April, it would have led to an annualized rate of 8.7 million vehicle sales for 2020. That would be a 50-year low. And then April volumes declined 46% year over year, which was just a historic low in the automotive market. But there's been a tremendous pickup since that time. At this point, the growth has been on an upward projection. We do expect it to kind of flatten out towards the end of the year. And if it stays consistent the last 4 months of the year, we would be at about a 14.5 million vehicle annualized rate. That would be well above what was projected if April's numbers had kind of stayed with us. And right now, LMC Automotive, which is a well-respected forecasting group, as well as Ward's Automotive, expect year-end sales to be around 13.9 million units. That was well below, usually the US has averaged about 17 million units for the past 5 years. But initially, in the beginning of COVID, that projection was that the US would end the year below 13 million vehicles. So certainly more positive growth and a surge in demand than was expected at that point in time. So a continued upward recovery that is very positive for the US market. Sales are expected to kind of continue that pattern into 2021. So we are hopeful that this will be a continued growth, particularly, again, as I noted earlier, for some of the more expensive vehicles, which we are proud that many of those are made in South Carolina. So definitely on the upswing in the automotive industry. And then finally, I wanted to talk a little bit. I know we all hear a lot about the industry transition and ACEs, automated, connected, electrified, and shared. And COVID has really had a tremendous short-term impact on those technologies. For the long term, we expect things to, continue with their momentum and the companies investing and developing in those technologies. But for right now, there have been some big shifts because of COVID. One of those has been that in the past, cost and convenience to people were the primary driver when people were choosing their modes of transportation. Now that has shifted to an emphasis on health, safety, and reliability. So kind of a transition on what motivated people to choose their modes of transportation. For example, a trip price has kind of lost its relevance. More people now may prefer private travel than shared travel. So we'll continue to see that evolve as the pandemic evolves. In addition, policymakers have always had a great deal of impact on mobility's future, whether that's incentives or different policies that promote shared mobility within cities or certain regions. So regulators have had a say-so throughout COVID. Many streets have been shut down in larger cities or blocks to make more room for walking and biking and individualized modes of transportation. So expect to see, kind of continued engagement from policymakers as we move through COVID so that they can react at the local level to what's happening there in their neck of the woods. In addition, the COVID-19 crisis has also exposed some of the vulnerabilities for certain business models and also in certain supply chains. So there's a great deal of thought that this is going to continue to spur industry consolidation in these areas and mergers and acquisitions. And in addition, the pandemic just allowed manufacturers to really focus and concentrate on their day-to-day business. And with these technologies, sometimes that investment or that time spent with them fell by the wayside for more basic things like keeping operations running, keeping workers safe. So a continued transition, back to normal doing business. So really, COVID continues to impact the automotive industry worldwide, but we are certainly happy that it appears to be on a positive projection at this point. So that is really all that I had for now. Certainly happy to take questions, and our next speakers will certainly go more in depth on some of these topics. So Christina, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Great, thank you very much, Amy, for this great overview and the outlook, and especially sharing about what you experienced in the industry during the last month and the pickup in the industry that you're expecting until the end of the year. That's really great to hear. Just want to say again for everybody who joined later, if you have questions for Amy, just put them in the question box in the control panel, and we'll collect them all at the end. If you have multiple questions, we see that there are a lot of questions coming in. We might not be able to answer them all, but we'll follow up with you individually. So thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
I actually just got the results from our first poll, and we can see that more than 60% of our audience has been to South Carolina already, which is great. For the others who have not been, I would strongly encourage you, once the circumstances allow it, to come visit us in South Carolina. We would be glad to welcome you and show you around. I can just speak for myself. I had the luck to be able to live in that region for some time. It's just beautiful. It's a very high quality of life and has a lot of international communities. So I just personally had a great time there. So looking at the time, we're now going to switch to the next speaker, and we're going to zoom in a little bit more in one selected area of our state that is called the Upstate of South Carolina, and talk about growth opportunities. The Upstate is represented by the Upstate SC Alliance, which is one of 9 regional alliances in our state that strongly supports economic development in their respective region, and that has a very strong automotive footprint. John Lummis is with us today, and he serves as the president and CEO of the Upstate SC Alliance. And in his role, he's responsible for driving the overall direction of the alliance and for developing relationship and collaboration throughout the whole region that he manages. So John, it's wonderful to have you, and I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Christina. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much for being with us today. I guess a good afternoon to the folks on the call. Thank you also for your interest in South Carolina and our industries here. As you probably already know, and we'll learn more through this call, South Carolina is truly a collaborative state in regards to economic development. Our partners at the South Carolina Department of Commerce do a fantastic job. South Carolina Auto Council, and you're going to hear from a couple of our private sector members today as well. But we work very closely together because we are truly a small state with about 5 million in population, but it's incredible the number of industries and international companies that are here. So I just want to thank you for being part of this call today. So the upstate of South Carolina is the region that I represent. And as you see on the screen, we have 10 counties, about 1/4 of the land area, and about 1/3 of the population of the state. Very manufacturing intensive, about 2,000 manufacturing companies in our region. So in the upstate, over the last 5 years, we've had 152 companies that have announced new locations. 40% of these have been international companies, which is incredible, and we want to continue that pace. 48.5% are from new companies, which really is a little unusual in economic development. Generally, you have about 75 to 80% of your new jobs being created from existing companies, but we have been very fortunate to have a number of new companies that have landed here. Okay. Exporting is incredibly important to South Carolina and the upstate. Amy talked a little bit about our inland port. That is a picture of our inland port in Greer. We are the #1 leading exporter of passenger vehicles and tires as a state of South Carolina. 85% of South Carolina exporters are small and medium enterprises, which is pretty incredible. 66,000 upstate jobs are connected to overall goods exported. And there have been estimates that between 65 and 70% of all the exports that go out of the Port of Charleston are from the upstate region. So we are located in a perfect spot for East Coast market saturation. About 6.6 million people live within 100 miles of the upstate. We get into the Charlotte MSA, the Atlanta MSA, and other areas, which is pretty incredible. The number of people that are, that live, in our region and around our region. The upstate is on the I-85 corridor, which is really the business backbone corridor in the southeastern U.S., connecting Atlanta and Charlotte. We're very proud of our airport that we have here in the upstate, the Greenville-Spartanburg Airport, International Airport. Departures to 17 major cities. I think that actually has gone up to 18 because of an announcement we just had at the end of last week. We also do a lot of air cargo to Europe and to Mexico out of our facility, and we've got a new 110,000 square foot commercial cargo facility, and we are serviced by several cargo providers. So this is particularly important for the automotive industry in the upstate. We also have, of course, the Atlanta airport, which is the largest airport in the world, within about an hour and a half to 2 hours from our location, in the Charlotte airport, which is one of the larger ones in the United States, within an hour and a half to 2 hour drive in the other direction. So we're very well supported by flights and international flights, particularly with connectivity from the GSP airport to Atlanta and Charlotte. Our upstate labor force is very focused on manufacturing and services around manufacturing, like transportation and trade, as I talked about earlier, exporting being such a huge employer here. Some of our counties have as much as 40% of their workforce in manufacturing. So our labor force, 710,000 people, and we are a manufacturing-centric area, and automotive is such an important part of this. Engineering and technology. The upstate of South Carolina has historically always been involved in manufacturing, and I say that since about 1880. The textile industry started locating here, and South Carolina was the center of that, in the upstate specifically. So that has led us to have a lot of engineers in our region. We have 3 times the national average of industrial engineers that live and work in our region, and that's very important to new companies coming in. We also are very blessed to have many research universities in our general region. Clemson University is located in the upstate of South Carolina, which is very important to economic development, and supports a lot of industries and manufacturing. Also, the University of South Carolina in Columbia that you see in the middle of our state, but then just all around within several hours of our location, lots of talent for research, and many of these are in engineering as well. One of our proudest assets in South Carolina and in the upstate of South Carolina is our technical college system. I worked in the technical college system for 8 years, so I know that system really provides workers with opportunities and with skilled training. We have 4 of these technical colleges in the upstate, and They are spaced out very well. So if you're coming in and you're going to be doing metalworking or welding or industrial technologies of any sort, you're going to find a trained labor force, and it's our technical college system that does this. It's been in operation for almost 60 years. One of the highlighted programs with the technical college is a statewide incentive program, and I generally say it's the most important statewide incentive because our state offers at no charge to companies recruitment solutions, development and training, project management, and basically will find your workforce for you when you locate here. In many occasions, if there's a piece of machinery that workers need to learn that's in Germany or somewhere else in Europe that they need to be trained on, the state will send them there to learn that. And this program is incredible. BMW has highlighted it as, if not the reason they came to South Carolina, one of the top reasons is because of that workforce training, and we would love to help you with that when you locate in South Carolina. So automotive, we do have a very strong presence in automotive in South Carolina. Amy talked about that, you know, with BMW, with Volvo, with Mercedes, having locations here. We have 17 OEMs within this 1 day's driving distance of the upstate of South Carolina. There are more automotive suppliers within 500 miles of Greenville, South Carolina, than there are within 500 miles of Detroit, Michigan. You see a number of our research assets, and I'm going to talk about these individually in a few minutes. But again, you see the companies that are located here: BMW, Michelin, Bosch. You go on down the list. An incredible amount of automotive that's concentrated in the upstate region. So I mentioned 17 OEMs within 1 day of driving distance. You can see the map, pretty incredible. The Southeast has truly become the automotive hub for the United States, and South Carolina is a huge part of that hub. BMW, as most of you are aware, put its first full manufacturing facility in South Carolina. It was outside of Germany. It opened in 1994. Production's been averaging close to 400,000 vehicles per year. They employ 11,000 plus people, and 70% of the vehicles that are made here are exported out, mainly out of the Port of Charleston, to over 140 countries. Michelin is also a great story. They opened their first manufacturing operation in 1975. They've had their North American headquarters here in the upstate since 1988. And as you're well aware, they manufacture some of the best tires in the world, if not the best tires in the world. And they employ over 7,500 people in the upstate and have multiple plants around South Carolina. Proterra is also a very interesting story, and it's a high-tech company that located here a number of years back, making battery technology and electric buses. Those have been sold all over the United States and all over the world, and they're located right here in the upstate of South Carolina. CUICAR, Clemson University International Center for Automotive Research, was developed really almost 15 years ago. It opened, and it is an institute that combines education, research, and actual real estate for companies to locate on. It's been in automotive. Now it has actually branched into many areas of manufacturing, but automotive research is what is done there. It's part of Clemson University, which, as I mentioned earlier, is our research university. We have undergrad, master's, and PhD level automotive engineers that are trained there, work very closely with companies, and it's a great asset for the upstate of South Carolina and really the state of South Carolina as a whole. ITIC is an incredible facility that we have here in the upstate in Greenville, South Carolina. It's the International Transportation Innovation Center. Has a test track, and we're working on connected automotive and sustainable mobility for vehicles there. A lot of partnerships with industry, universities, and we are doing some incredible research there, and would love for you to visit that on your visit to South Carolina. So I wanted to end with basically the Upstate Alliance, which is the group that I work for. We're the regional economic development group for the upstate 10 counties. We work to find leads and prospects in different industry groups, but we also help those companies once they land in the upstate of South Carolina. So we are open to help you with any information you'd need on the upstate of South Carolina in regard to markets, site selection, connections with people within the region. And we're here to help you find the upstate of South Carolina and South Carolina as your home. We work with all size companies, from a one-man, one-woman shop to companies the size of BMW. So we're here to help you. It is a free service, no charge. We work very closely with our local economic development team, with our state Department of Commerce and others to help you locate. So I wanted to end with that. I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have now or at the end. And again, just thank you for being with us today. Thanks for your interest in South Carolina, and we'd love to host you here whenever you can travel. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you very much, John. I know that you and your team, you're very active and supportive to companies, and we appreciate that. And thank you for pointing out again the workforce training programs that are available and the access to skilled workforce. When we work with incoming companies, that's always one of the main concerns for new investments. So thank you for highlighting that again. And it's very impressive to see what big investments you have had in your area. And well, I think we'll talk about a little bit about like smaller investments later. And thank you, and we'll see you in the Q&A session later.
Thank you.
So now we'll have a look at a much broader topic again, trade issues affecting automotive companies in the United States. So we're taking more like a bird's eye trade perspective on the automotive industry in general. And we'll have a look at topics like trade, geopolitics, NAFTA, customs, and foreign trade zones. Those are very broad topics that our expert Jay could probably talk about for hours, but he will give us a 15 minutes overview about major developments that are important to know. So I'm very glad to introduce Jay Rogers, partner with Nelson Mullins, a trusted law firm of our state. Jay has vast experience with providing corporate counsel to US-based and international companies, advising as to economic development incentives, international trade issues, corporate structure, M&A, immigration issues, just to name a few. So Jay, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Christina. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Just make sure. Okay. Yes, thank you for that introduction, Christina. And as you mentioned, we're going to cover quite a lot of ground today in just a short period of time. And as you said, my background is in international trade and the movement of goods and people across borders. So that typically involves touching customs, immigration issues, and economic development incentives. And so that's the focus of my practice. Our law firm has about 800 lawyers up and down, primarily the East Coast of the United States. but our home office is in South Carolina. And so that's where I focus my practice, and again, on these issues that you mentioned. I will jump over. This presentation is one that I've done a couple of times in about 30 or 40 minutes. And so today, since we've only got 15 minutes, I'm going to limit it to, or I'm going to skip over the first part. I left these slides in here if people are interested in them. But the first 11 or so slides that are in my presentation essentially deal with the history of tariffs and trade in the United States. And I can summarize that in a couple of minutes as, the United States has really had, for most of its history, a fairly high tariff wall around the country. Particularly as a young country in 1776, the idea was to protect new industry, and that attitude sort of pervaded the United States, and the attitude geopolitically was one of, well, we're alone on the North American continent, so to speak, in terms of, at least in terms of the great powers in Europe, and that allowed the United States to have a sort of an isolationist bent. And that continued for most of the history of the country until 1941, and when we were brought into World War II. And then, up until then, the average tariff area around the United States was something like 50 or 60%, with the Smoot-Hawley tariff bill in the 1930s. But after World War II, there emerged a sort of a bipartisan Republican-Democratic consensus in Washington in favor of free trade as really a part of a geopolitical containment strategy of the Soviet Union in the Cold War. And with the end of the Cold War in 1991, that bipartisan consensus of engagement, free trade has been sort of unraveling. And I think that 2016 and the Trump administration sent that overall movement into hyperdrive, but it was not. I guess my broad point is that it was not the Trump administration's sort of skepticism about free trade is not a new development, and it's really, in a sense, a reversion to a historical bias in the United States toward isolationism and high tariffs. So I've jumped down to this slide, are high tariffs an aberration? Really, in answering that question, I don't think that they are. I think that the way that the Trump administration has wielded tariffs has caught a lot of people off guard. And so we'll talk today about how I want to focus more of our time, since it is limited, on the sort of practical strategies of how to deal with higher tariffs. For the last 70 or 80 years, when tariffs were an average of 3 to 5%, and lower than 3% in a lot of places, including on European goods, most people didn't pay much attention. They weren't enough to move the needle. But now people are a lot more of our trading partners are having to think about tariffs. And so I want to talk about practical strategies for dealing with higher tariffs. Yeah, and just briefly where we are, in terms of various free trade agreements. Most people probably know the Trans-Pacific Partnership has actually been pushed forward by Japan primarily, and is a viable movement. Even though the United States essentially pulled out of it, if Biden comes in, that may be revived. Although historically the Democratic Party has been actually more skeptical about free trade than the Republican Party. The Republican Party was always the free trade party. So if people are thinking that Biden is going to come in and sort of reverse everything that Trump has done on the tariff front, the trade front, I think that's probably wishful thinking. The Biden administration may approach things tactically from a different standpoint than the Trump administration, but if Biden is elected, I wouldn't expect him to all of a sudden revert to a free trade sort of mantra. We all know NAFTA was attacked, but it survived more or less intact, and so that's where we are. the key transatlantic trade issues right now, steel and aluminum. Most people probably know Trump put on tariffs on steel and aluminum, not just on Europe, but those had some impact on American trade with Europe. Airplanes, the Boeing Airbus trade dispute has been out there for a while. In the last year or so, the WTO agreed to allow the U.S. to put up to 25% tariffs on a wide variety of EU goods. And so that has been done. As far as I know, most of those goods are not automotive. A lot of agricultural goods, maybe some goods tangentially related to the automotive industry, but wine, cheese, a number of Italian sort of leather goods, that kind of thing. The big, I guess, question for a lot of folks on this call is probably, the possibility of tariffs on automotive goods coming into the U.S. Right now, the Trump administration has quieted a great deal its rhetoric on the automotive tariffs toward the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. Trump was talking a lot about putting tariffs on automotive and automotive parts coming from Europe into the U.S. The administration has gone relatively quiet on that, and the thinking has been that was primarily a lever to try and get a free trade deal with the EU done on Trump's terms. So again, everything may change in 30 days depending on the election, but right now at least the immediate threat of tariffs on automotive parts is sort of in the background. Again, if Biden comes in, he's indicated that he feels like Trump's approach is sort of clumsy in terms of the EU trade relationship, but he hasn't indicated that he's going to fundamentally break with the notion of putting more pressure on the EU for what he and the Democrats see as more of a level playing field. So, the WTO, most of the folks on the call are probably aware that the WTO is sort of in a suspended animation phase right now. The U.S. has been blocking the election of new judges to the WTO appellate bench, and there's some real question about whether the WTO can continue to function if there's not some loosening of that pressure. Brexit, Brexit impacts the trade picture because there's probably more of an impulse in the White House to cut a trade deal directly with the United Kingdom, a free trade deal, than probably the EU as a whole, and that those talks certainly appear to be farther along than the EU trade talks. So there's in my view, a pretty realistic chance that the United States will cut a free trade deal with Britain and not the EU. Certainly not, or not as comprehensive a free trade deal, so that Britain will become part of sort of the core universe of U.S. trading partners, consisting of Mexico, Canada, Korea, the United Kingdom, and a few countries, like that. But those being sort of the core, those are probably half of or more of the U.S. trading relationship right there. And that may take pressure off to cut a deal with the EU. So the geopolitics of this, drive a lot of this, because the sort of historical trade-off between lowering tariff barriers into the U.S. in exchange for geopolitical cooperation against the Soviet Union, as I mentioned, that geopolitical rationale hasn't been there for 30 years, and so that's a big part of what's driving this shakeup. All right, practical coping strategies. Just some ideas. The basic the foundation of most tariffs is the country of origin for products. So whether a tariff is put on a particular product depends on where it originates, which can be a complicated question. It's typically where it's finally substantially transformed into its final state, ready for sale. So that's you know, a product may be 80% produced, for example, in Poland, but if the final transformation of it into the product which is ready to sell happens in Germany, then it may be a German origin product. So that kind of thing is important to keep your eye on. Under a lot of free trade agreements like NAFTA, KORUS, the Korean agreement, CAFTA, the tariff shifting substitutes for substantial transformation and may determine whether what the country of origin is. So the issue of, you know, tariffs are typically driven by the dutiable value of the product, which is, you can think of as the fair market value minus or plus some other factors like shipping, insurance, things like that. So if you're thinking about how to deal with tariffs, if there are tariffs coming into the U.S., like I say, your first thought ought to be about whether or not you can ship production inside the U.S., get behind the tariff wall, you know, at least for the final stage of production. That gets you behind the tariff wall and sort of solves the problem as long as the product is finally substantially transformed in the U.S. But other strategies are lowering the dutiable value when it comes into the U.S., looking at first sale, you know, the first sale price, you know, transfer pricing, and who is this, and this is a technical issue that a lot of folks overlook, but looking at who is actually the vendor, or rather the importer of record, because that's who's actually responsible for the tariffs, and that can be an important issue as between, say, a manufacturer and its suppliers or its customers. Another practical strategy for dealing with tariff issues is asking the customs service for a ruling request. If there's a close question, or you're planning production operations and you're trying to decide whether or not a certain product is made in the U.S., made in Mexico, made in Germany, these sorts of questions can be submitted to customs and in advance in the form of a letter ruling request, and you can create some certainty and plan around the answers that you get. Now, the downside is that if you ask the question and it's answered in a way that you don't like, that you're stuck with that. So it has to be thought through carefully. These customs rulings have to involve concrete, specific facts and not just be hypotheticals. Sort of a variation of this is tariff engineering. It's legitimate to engineer your products to avoid tariffs as long as there are, you know, legitimate business reasons for doing that. So the kinds of things that we're talking about, the Heartland case involved, you know, whether sugar was put in or molasses was put into sugar, more or less just to avoid tariffs, and it became kind of a big mess. But legitimate sorts of engineering to address tariff issues are okay. Yeah, you don't have, you're allowed to do that. Another practical strategy that a lot of folks are probably familiar with are foreign trade zones, free trade zones in some countries they're called, but these are essentially areas that are outside the United States customs territory for legal purposes. Now, they may be, for example, just outside the port of Charleston, or there's several in South Carolina, so they're physically in the United States, but legally speaking, they're sort of outside the United States. And this opens up a number of tariff strategies, planning strategies that can be used to either avoid tariffs entirely or at least mitigate their impact. For example, I know that it's public knowledge that BMW has a free trade zone on its site. And so to the extent that it's bringing parts in from Europe, turning the parts into cars and then re-exporting those cars, as long as all of that is done properly under their free trade zone, then they can avoid any potential tariffs that may or may not come from a Trump or a Biden administration, at least on the re-exported cars. And on the cars sold into the U.S. market, they could you know, delay the tariffs until such time as the cars are brought off the assembly line and actually entered into the market. That's just an example, and that's all public record.
Jay, I'm sorry to interrupt. Is there any chance you could wrap up in the next minute?
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry, I meant to cut on my watch and keep an eye on that. So yeah. Let's see, some more about FTZs, and these are just, like I say, some public record existing foreign trade zones in South Carolina. Michelin, BMW, Fuji, ZF, all have these things. And customs bonded warehouses are kind of a variation on the free trade zone idea. And duty drawbacks, if you don't have a free trade zone, these are ways that you can get duties back after you re-export your goods. Oops. Yeah, and so we've already talked a little bit about this, sort of the big picture. You know, what do things look like during the potential change in DC and sort of the overall state of globalization. But we can talk about some of that during the Q&A if you'd like, and I'll turn it back over to you, Christina.
Great, thank you, Jay. Thanks for this very comprehensive overview in a short amount of time. We appreciate that you shared some practical coping strategies. I think these will be very helpful for companies. And as I mentioned before, we cooperate strongly with partners like Jay. So if you have any question, like more specific question that we can further investigate for you, please put them in the chat box. Great, thank you. See you later, Jay. As our fourth topic today, we'll have a look at what it means for you if your company is already ready to start an own operation in the US. If you could have a quick look at the poll, we would like to know from you quickly if you already have defined plans to start to actually invest within the next 2 to 3 years. That would be great. I'll just give you a second for that. So great, thank you very much. I can see that 30% of the audience has actually plans already to invest within the next 2 to 3 years. So I think the upcoming presentation will be very helpful for you. If you're not already, we understand that this is a long-term process, and we can still help you at this early stage that you are right now with other information. We'll hear a little bit more about what it means now from an expert, what it means to start your own facility in the US. And we'll talk to Kyle, who is an expert that has supported many international companies with starting their own operation in South Carolina. So we'll hear what is important to consider, like when it comes, for example, to permitting or property acquisition. And our expert for that is Kyle Clampett, Vice President and Principal with Alliance Consulting Engineers. It's a South Carolina-based civil and environmental engineering firm. And Kyle has had many years of experience with helping international companies with planning and design of site engineering for industrial parks, subdivision, and commercial developments. So Kyle, we look forward to hear from you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Christina. If you can go to the next slide, we'll go ahead and get talking. As Christina mentioned, our goal today is to go through what it is to, once you've established that you want to come to the United States, that you're not going to be able to start work the first day you start your operation. So what we want to do is help you prepare for understanding the timeline to get moving forward with actually putting shovels in the ground and starting to construct your building. As Christina mentioned, we're a civil engineering based firm with an architectural arm as well. A lot of times in Europe, sometimes civil can be viewed as both site work engineer as well as the architect. Our firm is essentially handling the site work and the development of your site to get ready for the building to be placed. We've been around for 16 years. We have 5 office locations, 4 throughout South Carolina and 1 in Charlotte, North Carolina, and completing over 1,800 projects. We'll talk a little bit about some of those today, but we do have specific to automotive. We have experience with 2 OEMs, with both BMW and Volkswagen, as well as some suppliers that we'll talk about today, and those including GT Tire and Continental Tire. Next slide. South Carolina is divided up into 4 regions. To talk on Amy's theme of food, this map kind of mimics, we also have what we have a barbecue map as well. It's the different flavors of barbecue. We also have different flavors of sites throughout the state. With the 4 regions being known as what you see here, the Upstate, the Midlands, the PD, and the Low Country. The Low Country, the PD, would be considered your coastal communities. You're gonna have a lot more sandy soils, flatter terrain. So if you have a facility that wants to be close to the port, you can be in those locations. One of the advantages of in South Carolina, you don't just have to think about the port only being in Charleston or the new Jasper terminal that was referenced in Amy's presentation as well. We also have the inland port in Greer, which would be in John's territory in the upstate. We also have a new one in Dillon, South Carolina, which is in the PD region in Dillon County up near the North Carolina line. So you don't just have to be near the water to be part of the port. And that's one of the advantages of South Carolina. Amy mentioned the 5 interstates that run throughout our state, and the rail systems were served by both Norfolk Southern as well as CSX Rail throughout our state. If you move into the Midlands area, you see topography extends a little bit more drastic than the flatness of the coastal communities, but the soils become more from a sandy to a clayey mixture. All the areas are available for development. They just change the type of your foundation design and structural design. So that's why it's important to understand your site before you start your architectural design. As you get into the upstate, we get a little bit more terrain involved, topography changes, and more of a clay soil consistency. You go to the next slide, Christina. All right, the 46 counties that comprise within South Carolina, those are separate governmental agencies within the state. So each county has its own leadership, its own rules and regulations. So it's important to factor that in to some of these timelines we're going to talk about today. Some counties are more rural and you can go faster with the permitting process. Some are more urban communities that might take a little bit longer. So if you're looking to move to some of our bigger cities, you need to plan for a longer permitting timeline than the rural communities. Our state capital located near the center of the state in Richland County on this map, known as Columbia. And we have a little over 5 million in population based on around 2016. But the new census will be updated soon. As mentioned, we're one of the fastest growing states in the country in the Southeast. So next slide. Permitting requirements. Land disturbance permitting, that is essentially allowing you to start your site work, to start the grading. There's a lot of different names to be associated with it, but this allows you to start construction. That's the importance of it. It is a state issued permit and it takes 30 to 45 days. There are expedited paths to reduce that timeline, but the standard timeline is 30 to 45 days. That can be done concurrently with the other 2 that we have listed below, which is the encroachment permit. That is your permission to have a driveway onto the public roads. That is also state regulated, as well as sometimes at the county level if you're in the more rural areas. But most of our roadway encroachment permits are regulated by the State Department of Transportation. Water and wastewater construction permit, that is only applicable for sites that do not have water and wastewater present at your site. If you already have water and wastewater that's there today, then you would not need this permit. But if we need to extend mains to your property, then this permit would apply. And again, that's state regulated as well. On this next slide, we're going to talk about some of the more federally regulated permits, such as air permitting and wetlands. These are your longest lead time permits. Wetlands are only going to come into place when you impact the federally regulated wetlands, which would be jurisdictional wetlands. And that's done through the United States Army Corps of Engineers as well. And the good news about South Carolina is we actually have a position that's held at the Army Corps office in Charleston that is paid for by South Carolina. We fund that person. That doesn't mean we get preferential treatment, but what that means is our projects get put to the top of the stack and we can get permits faster than any other state. That can be proven by, there was a project done in Volvo, 216 acres of wetland impacts occurred, and when that permit was obtained in 121 days. Most other states can't state that. So when you see wetlands on a site, we don't want you to be scared. We can handle that. We've done it. We have proof of it, past history, and we can get that accommodated. So that doesn't eliminate the site necessarily. Air permitting, there's two different methods. One, if you got a minor source or a major source permit, that's why the variance of the 25 to 90 days. You cannot start foundation work until that air permit is in place. So when you come to start looking in the United States, what we want to do is first at least look at your emissions and determine if you're going to be a minor or major source permit, because that's very important to your timeline. You can start grading of the site, but you cannot start anything associated with the building itself until that permit is in hand. The building permit is something that is issued from the local level, either the cities or the counties that you would be located for your facility. And that timeline, as I touched on earlier, varies depending on which area of the state you're in. So what we'd like to do is get more depth into that once we know where you'll be looking at within the state. Next slide. One example here we have is Mingwa USA. They're a supplier to BMW. You're going to see later they've had previous success, but this is a project that is going on now, active. That's 200,000 square foot or about 20,000 square meter facility. We've got about a 10-month construction timeline. That gives you an idea of how fast we can move in South Carolina. It is a business-friendly state, so the goal of permitting from a state level is to not get in your way. And we have proof of that throughout the 46 counties throughout the state, but we want to show you an example of how fast we can move. On the next slide here, we'll get into a little bit more detail of property acquisition process. It depends on if it's public or privately held. Public would mean the county owns the land. That can move a little bit faster in terms of the county would own the land. You'd go through 3 readings. Typically, those happen 2 times a month. So you're looking at about a month and a half to turn over the property from the county agency to yourselves. Most of the time, the county owning it means your due diligence is already completed, and we'll talk about those later on, but that's going to save time. But we do want to let you know that permitting can take place while this property acquisition is occurring. So these are all going to happen in parallel. Again, our goal is to get you to construction as fast as possible in South Carolina, and this is the ways we can do that, of having permitting through the county initially while your property acquisition is taking place. All right, next slide. Expedited approach to streamline a project. Due diligence, and when we say due diligence, that's talking about the topographic survey, so understanding what is the elevations on the site. We also want to look at phase 1 environmental site assessment. That is understanding what are the past uses on this property, and did they create a risk to the groundwater or the soils on your site? You want to have this completed before you take ownership to protect your company from any liability from past uses. Those typically take about 4 weeks. Boundary survey, that's just identifying the limits of your property. So setting pins at your property corners to understand where are the meets and bounds of your property. The design level geotechnical explorations, that is doing boring. So we're actually drilling into the ground to understand where is the groundwater, where is the rock, what is the bearing capacity of the soil, what is the seismic classification. Those are important factors when you're designing your structural connections on the building as well as sizing your foundations. And then also the wetlands delineation. We touched on that earlier. Having a delineation in place is a must on a property before you start pursuing it. Those can take 2 to 6 months time, depending on the level of wetlands and which type of jurisdictional determination you go after. So when you're looking for sites, first we would just recommend you'd come to the Department of Commerce or go to the Upstate Alliance and work with them. They can identify sites for you that are already, these due diligence services have been completed. The reason that's important is you can see that's going to save you 2 to 3 months on your site selection process and allows you to start design right away. You don't really want to start your design until these due diligence efforts are in place. So saving those 2 to 3 months are a bit crucial to a project timeline. Next, we talk about the site design. That's typically 1 to 2 months, depending on the size of the property. The South Carolina Palmetto Sites advantages. The Palmetto Sites program is a program the Department of Commerce has in place that is helping make sites ready. What we call shovel ready is a term that used to be used a lot of times. And essentially, if a Palmetto site, a piece of land is identified as Palmetto site, that means the due diligence is complete. The Department of Commerce has reviewed it. Entities like ourselves have already reviewed it, and we've vetted that site to understand where are the utilities, what is the time to get the utilities there, what's the capacity of those utilities, and the due diligence is already complete. The reason for that is we want to be able to answer your requests for information that are submitted efficiently and quickly as possible. So looking at those first would be if you're wanting to move quickly. If you're out to that 2 to 3 year timeline, you might have a little bit of time to look at other sites, but most folks, when they make the decision to invest, they're ready. So we'd suggest looking at these Palmetto sites first. All right, next slide. These next 3 slides are going to be talking about our personal past experience, both at Alliance Consulting Engineers as well as the state of South Carolina. Plastic Omnium, they are a fuel systems emissions and fuel systems and emission reduction solutions supplier to BMW. They're located in the city of Greer in Spartanburg County, South Carolina. On 72 acres, they were able to fit 600,000 square feet. That's a pretty typical ratio that you're going to see, and that was the importance of why we wanted to list the 600,000 square feet on 72 acres. They've actually completed, we've completed 7 projects for them since they first came into concept in South Carolina. And then on the next slide is another example of success of an automotive supplier in the United States and specifically to South Carolina. The importance on this slide is 3 separate manufacturing facilities. Mingwa USA is a spoiler assembly and seat parts supplier to BMW. They're also located in the upstate region in John's Upstate Alliance territory. 209,000 square feet, 400,000 square feet, and 200,000 square feet. This shows you that you can be profitable because they wouldn't be building that second building if they weren't in South Carolina and working specifically with BMW. And on each of these projects, we were the civil engineer of record, providing all permitting, design, assistance throughout these facilities. The final slide is another example from the Midlands part of the state in something called Newberry County, which is northwest of Columbia. This is Technics. They're actually a supplier to both BMW and Volvo. This is a heavy stamping operation. We want to show you the importance of stamping facilities being capable of coming to South Carolina. The soils are robust and strong to be able to support these foundations. This is a 70,000 square foot manufacturing facility, and they recently just completed their first expansion of 18,000 square feet with plans for future expansions in the future. And with them being both the BMW and Volvo supplier, both of those being located in South Carolina, being in the Midlands allows you to supply both of those facilities on the just-in-time delivery basis that those OEMs require. So that was a quick synopsis of the process with site development. What we would recommend is contact us as quickly as possible. We can help vet the sites for you and understand the schedule associated with your specific project. Christina, I know we want to go to questions and answers next. So.
Great, Kyle. Thank you very much. I liked how you shared actual company testimonials and examples of actual permitting times, for example. I think that gives great reference on what to expect when locating in South Carolina. So now just looking at the time, I want to thank the whole panel again. And if you, Amy, John, and Jay could make yourself visible again so we can start our Q&A session, that would be great. We want to be respectful of everybody's time, so we have 10 more minutes left. We might run a couple of minutes over, so everybody who has to leave this call in 10 minutes, we'll follow up and address your questions later. Well, we'll just start with the first question. So what opportunities are there to get involved prior to establishing a presence in South Carolina? Amy, would you want to comment on that?
Sure, thanks, Christina. So as I mentioned in my presentation, we have an annual event, the South Carolina Automotive Summit, where we bring together the OEMs, the suppliers, kind of everyone in the state that's involved in automotive. And that's a great time to kind of check out what we have going on, meet with companies, just get a kind of a feel for our South Carolina team, South Carolina, as Christina mentioned. Normally in non-COVID times, we participate in Select USA. We have a number of other ways through commerce or the regional alliances. You can have a more formal visit to South Carolina, and of course webinars and opportunities like this one. So we have a number of ways, and if you reach out to anybody that spoke here today, they'd be happy to get you plugged in all sorts of ways.
Great, thank you very much, Amy. I think that's just right. So please make use of like all of the panelists here, and we'll connect you. I think that's a great first step to get started connecting in South Carolina. So looking at the next questions, what if we are not ready to invest in our own facility if we want to start small? Maybe John and Kyle, you have some examples to share?
Yeah.
Sure. If you don't mind if I go first, Kyle, we have a program at the Upstate Alliance that the state of South Carolina also has. It's called the Landing Pad Program. And basically what we found in our travels is that probably 75% of the companies that we talk to want to come to the U.S. and to South Carolina, but not necessarily bring their entire manufacturing operation and do a huge investment. They want to get a market presence of some sort, either in sales or automation, engineering, something like that. So what we do and what the state does is works very closely with these smaller projects, and we as an investor-based organization, we have contacts with folks like Kyle and Jay. They're both members of our group that we can put them in touch with when they come and they can get assistance. So we're set up to help even the smallest companies, and we really push that because we think if the international companies can land in the upstate, they'll want to stay and grow.
Yep. Thank you, John. Yeah, as John touched on, there's those facilities throughout the state where you can save on that brick and mortar cost up front and allow you to start small and grow, get your feet wet in South Carolina first. There's those locations throughout South Carolina, but specifically Upstate Alliance would be the first one to reach out to talk with about our landing pad or incubator facilities.
Great, thank you, John and Kyle. I truly think that's a great program, the Landing Pad program, and please everyone just reach out to us if you want to know more about it. Jay, there's one question for you maybe. Is there any possibility to travel to the US currently for business purposes? Can you talk on that?
Sure. It's complicated. There is a travel ban from the Schengen passport area and Britain, the UK right now, due to COVID. There are exceptions to the travel ban. There are two ways to get an exception. One is through the US consulate in your home country. The other is through an application to a CBP port of entry, typically an airport here in the United States. We have done this and had some success with it, but it's not easy. Our first attempt at it was denied, and we wound up appealing it and winning. So it's certainly not easy, but it can be done. You've essentially got to show that it's in the national interest of the United States to be able to waive the travel ban under Section 212F of the Immigration Code. So it can be done, but it's not easy, and you need to be able to show a strong, impact on the American economy, a negative impact from your not being able to come. Essentially, is the approach.
Okay, thank you. We actually got a lot of questions like this recently. You probably too, so thank you.
Yes, it goes the other way too. We've got Americans who are trying to get into Europe and Germany in particular, and it's a similar situation. So you've got to work through an exception of some kind, essentially. And most of the exceptions are based on economic reasons and and obviously showing that you don't have COVID.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So looking at the next question, what place has a little car builder in the US? Maybe I can comment on that first. So in general, we can say that most of our companies are small and medium-sized companies in South Carolina, more than 90%. And those are the companies that we support most with our services. And once you're located in South Carolina, you become a South Carolina company. And with this, you get access to a range of services that can help you grow and expand your business from there. There are programs like sourcing problems if you want to build a local supply sourcing programs, if you want to build a local supply chain that we can help you with. There are export programs available. We can get you in touch with workforce development programs like apprenticeship programs that will help you supply workforce in the long run. And there are supplier matchmaking events, for example, at BMW, Mercedes, that can help you grow, especially if you're a smaller company in South Carolina. But maybe, Amy, you have some more ideas of how like smaller companies can grow in the industry?
I mean, I think you covered it. We just have a variety of resources from workforce. This SC Fraunhofer Alliance, once you're here, is able to fund projects if they fit a certain parameter for any size company. All of our local academic institutions have a lot of individualized partnerships that our technical colleges and universities form with businesses of all sizes. So there's a lot of opportunities.
That sounds great, thank you. So I think just looking at the main questions, I think we have covered it for the most part. Like as I said, with any questions we did not cover today, we'll follow up. Is there anything from our panelists that you would like to share at the end? Anything that came to your mind that you think is still important to mention?
If you don't mind, Christina, I'll just say something. I really do think that, you know, we've got a great track record in South Carolina with international business, particularly European-based business. We have about 1,200 international companies, as you saw from Amy's map, in the state, 572 in the upstate of South Carolina from 34 countries. So, I mean, we have a long track record in working very closely with you and making sure that you're successful once you get here. So we'd love the opportunity. And I'm not just speaking for the upstate, I'm talking about the whole state of South Carolina to work with you and help you expand your business in the United States.
Thank you, John. And Christina, I just want to say thank you and to all the attendees today. Thank you for taking out so much of your time this afternoon for y'all to speak with us and let you know a little bit about South Carolina. Hopefully we've shown you today we're ready. As John mentioned, we've proven it, that we can do this previously, and we're ready to assist the next company looking to invest here and to help your process be as smooth as possible.
I'll echo that. Just thank you everybody for joining us today.
Yeah, same here. I think the overall message, and Amy talked about this some, but is that I think South Carolina is reopening for business, and we're experiencing a sharp upturn here. So it is, even though there are a lot of headaches right now, it's a good time to be thinking about coming over, and the obstacles are going to begin to fall away fairly quickly, I think, in terms of all the COVID restrictions and whatnot. So I think once we get past the election, a lot of the COVID issues will start to become depoliticized, and we'll be able to get back to business.
Great, thank you so much to all of you. Appreciate you taking the time. Thanks a lot to the audience for all the questions. We look forward to hearing from your feedback, and we'll be happy to schedule follow-ups anytime. So you have a good day.
Thanks, Christina.
Thank you, Christina.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.